Okay, we have some nice continuity this week in our New Testament reading as we are finishing the first letter to the Thessalonians and then reading all of the second letter. So let's talk about what we find. Okay, we mentioned last week that the first three chapters of First Thessalonians are really personal in the way that Paul is simply describing his past relationship with these Christians, his present circumstance, their present circumstance facing persecution, and the future of what he looks forward to in being able to visit them again. And so it's really not until this fourth and fifth chapter that Paul gets into some of the teaching that he feels like is needed for these Christians. And so in chapters 4 and 5, he is going to discuss a few things. There's a section about holiness and controlling the vessel that has been given to each one of us so that we can not only be sanctified in the eyes of the Lord, but also treat our brothers and sisters in Christ honorably. And so there is also then a section about brotherly love that Paul wants the Thessalonians to abound in. And then the rest of the book really is given to this discussion of the day of the Lord. It appears as if the Christians in Thessalonica were afraid or worried about the Christians that had already died, and if they are going to miss out on Jesus' coming. And so Paul says, no, when Jesus comes back, the dead will be raised, and his people will meet him as he returns, and so they can comfort each other even in the mourning of the ones that have been lost. And then he goes on in chapter 5 to say some things about being ready, because that will come as a thief in the night, so to speak. And so Christians should be sober, they should be aware, they should be ready, unlike those of the world that continue on with no awareness of the urgency of the situation. Okay, well then, 2 Thessalonians, Paul writes a follow-up letter, and it's interesting to see how some of these things relate to what was said in 1 Thessalonians. The first part of 2 Thessalonians, in fact, the first couple chapters, talks about the idea of Jesus' return, but maybe clarifies some things. First of all, because they are still facing persecution, Paul wants the Thessalonians to be assured that God will bring vengeance on all those who are wicked, all those that are disobedient to the gospel, and those that are oppressing them, even in this specific circumstance. That God will take care of that when Jesus comes back. But what about the timing of that? Is that coming soon? It appears as if maybe some in Thessalonica misinterpreted or twisted Paul's first letter to say that it's already happened or it's going to happen any moment. And so Paul lays out some things to clarify and say, no, there are things that have to happen first before this day of the Lord will come. Now, what exactly Paul is saying in terms of the specifics is very hard to determine, and you'll notice that in 2 Thessalonians 2. But in an overall sense, for our purposes here, basically so that I don't have to answer any of these hard questions, let's just say that Paul is saying, no, there are some things that need to happen before God's plan will ultimately come to fruition. Okay, then in chapter 3, there's another clarification, I think, because it seems like there are those that have said, oh, well, Jesus is coming back any moment, and so let's just kick our feet back, not do anything, and wait for that to happen. And Paul says, no, waiting for Jesus to come back. And I think this is critically important for us who 2,000 years later are still waiting, and maybe because of that 2,000-year time lapse, we are even more tempted to kick back and to not think about what is going to happen. Paul says waiting is an active thing, that as we wait, that as we are very aware that Jesus is coming back, we do so actively, and we are working hard for the Lord, working hard to love and to serve other people as we await to meet him when he returns. And so 1 and 2 Thessalonians kind of tie together beautifully these themes of Jesus' return and looking forward to that in the future, and what that means for us right here in the present. So enjoy that, and look back next week around the same time for the next Bible reading video. Thank you.